They saw a frail woman past her prime, a burden to be discarded. When my daughter pointed to the door, I did not cry. I picked up my bag and walked into the cold afternoon. They thought they had secured a $3 million estate. They had no idea that by kicking me out, they had activated a legal clause that would leave them destitute before the sun came up. My name is Margaret Holloway. At 56 years old, I had become invisible in the very home I built from the ground up. I stood near the edge of the grand living room, clutching a glass of water that I had no intention of drinking, watching the swirl of expensive fabrics and hearing the hollow laughter of people who judged worth by the label on a jacket. I wore my grey wool cardigan, the one with the slight fray at the left cuff, and a skirt that had gone out of fashion 10 years ago. To the guests crowding the room, I was merely background noise, a relic that clashed with the modern aesthetic my daughter so desperately cultivated. The house was alive tonight. It was a celebration of my son-in-law's promotion, a victory party that screamed opulence. But the air around me felt thin and cold. I watched my daughter, Vanessa, glide through the crowd. She looked stunning in a silk dress that cost more than my first car, her smile bright and practiced. Yet, every time her eyes swept past the corner where I stood, that smile vanished, replaced by a tightness in her jaw. I was the stain on her perfect picture. Vanessa whispered something to her husband, Mark, and then began to make her way toward me. Mark stayed behind, swirling his scotch, his eyes fixed deliberately on a painting on the far wall. His refusal to look at me told me everything I needed to know before a single word was spoken. Vanessa stopped 2 feet away from me. She did not lower her voice enough to be discreet, but she kept it low enough to sound menacing. "Mom, look at you," she said, her voice dripping with a mixture of pity and disdain. "Everyone is asking who the housekeeper is. It's humiliating." I looked down at my hands. These were the hands that had scrubbed floors and signed contracts in the dead of night to ensure she never knew hunger. I dressed in my Sunday best. "Vanessa," I said quietly, "your best isn't good enough for this life," she snapped, taking a sip of her champagne. "Mark and I have been talking. We can't do this anymore." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "Do what carry you," she said. The cruelty in her eyes was sharp and clear. "You contribute nothing to this household. You sit in your room, you wear these rags, and you drag down our image. Mark is a partner now. We need this house to represent our future, not whatever sad past you are holding on to." I looked over her shoulder at Mark. He was laughing at a joke someone had made, but his shoulders were tense. He knew what was happening. He was letting his wife do the dirty work while he enjoyed the liquor paid for by the equity of this very house. "You are asking me to leave?" I asked, my voice steady despite the trembling in my knees. "I'm not asking," Vanessa said, her face hardening. "I'm telling you. Tonight. Pack a bag. We need the guest room for people who actually matter to our social circle. You can go to a shelter or, I don't know, figure it out. You're a grown woman." The room seemed to tilt. The music, the chatter, the clinking of crystal, it all blurred into a deafening hum. I remembered the nights I sat up helping her with homework. I remembered the second mortgage I took out, secretly, to pay for Mark's failed startup 5 years ago. They thought this house belonged to them because I let them play pretend. I had stepped into the shadows so they could shine, and now they were using that darkness to discard me. I looked around the room. A few guests were glancing our way, sensing the tension. I saw the sneer on the face of a neighbour, a woman who had never worked a day in her life. They saw a leech being scraped off. They did not know they were looking at the host. I could have screamed. I could have listed every dollar I had transferred into their accounts over the last decade. But I looked at Vanessa's face, so arrogant, so sure of her ownership, and I realized that words were useless. She did not respect me as a mother. She barely tolerated me as a human being. "Fine," I said. Vanessa blinked, seemingly surprised by the lack of a fight. "Good. Don't make a scene on your way out." I set the water glass down on a coaster. I did not look at Mark. I did not look at the guests. I straightened my spine, feeling the weight of the years fall away, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. "I will get my things," I said. As I turned to the stairs, Vanessa called out after me, loud enough for the nearest group to hear, "And don't take anything that isn't yours." "Mom." We checked the inventory. Laughter rippled through the small circle near her. I paused, my hand on the banister. I did not turn back. I simply closed my eyes for a second and breathed in the scent of the expensive lilies filling the hallway lilies I had paid for. "Don't worry." "Vanessa," I said, my voice projecting just enough to cut through the chatter nearby. "I never take what isn't mine, but I always take back what is." I walked up the stairs to pack, leaving them to their champagne and their ignorance. They thought the night was over, but the sun had not yet set on my day. I moved through the small guest room with the efficiency of a soldier breaking camp. I did not pack the woolen sweaters Vanessa had bought me, the ones that made me look like a shapeless grey lump. Instead, I reached for the items that actually mattered. I took the small, cracked leather folio from the bottom drawer of the nightstand. To the untrained eye, it was just old stationery. But inside, tucked between yellowing pages, were the original incorporation documents of the entity that legally owned this estate. Vanessa stood in the doorway, swirling her wine, watching me with a look of bored irritation. Mark loomed behind her, checking his watch as if my departure was delaying a very important toast. God. "Mom. Are you really taking that rotting garbage?" Vanessa asked, gesturing to the folio with her glass. "You're acting like a hoarder. It's embarrassing." "Let her take it." "Van." Mark chuckled, the sound wet and condescending. "It's probably the only thing she owns that's worth... well, actually, it's worth absolutely nothing." I did not look up as I placed the folio gently into my canvas tote bag. They saw a senile old woman clinging to scraps. They did not realize that the house they were standing in, the roof over their heads, and the very floorboards beneath their expensive Italian loafers had never been transferred to their names. They assumed that because they lived here, because they threw parties here, and because I paid the property taxes quietly from a pension account they ignored, that they were the masters. They had never bothered to read the fine print of the family trust I had established 20 years ago. "I am almost ready," I said, my voice flat. I added a silver fountain pen to the bag. It was tarnished, but it was the pen I had used to sign the deal that acquired the land this subdivision was built on. "Hurry up," Vanessa snapped. "The caterers need this room to store the extra coats. You're holding up the flow of the party." I zipped the bag shut. It was light. My entire life in this house, reduced to 5 pounds of canvas and leather. I walked past them, forcing them to step aside. Mark rolled his eyes, but he moved. As I descended the grand staircase, the noise of the party rose up to meet me. The living room was a sea of black ties and sequined dresses. I could feel the eyes of the guests latching onto me. I saw the whispers exchange like currency. They looked at my scuffed shoes and my lack of jewelry. They saw failure. In their world, value was loud. It was shiny cars and loud announcements. They did not understand that real power is silent. Real wealth does not need to scream. It simply is. I reached the bottom of the stairs and navigated through the crowd. A woman in a red dress actually pulled her skirt back as I passed, as if poverty were contagious. Near the front door, the head of the catering team was directing a server with a tray of appetizers. His name was Arthur, a man who had managed the executive dining room at my firm 15 years ago. He was one of the few people who knew my face from the days before I erased myself for the sake of my daughter's ego. He saw me coming with my bag. His eyes widened slightly, darting from my face to the bag, and then to the laughing couple, my daughter and her husband, at the top of the stairs. He understood instantly. Arthur stepped forward, ignoring a guest who was trying to flag him down. He opened the heavy oak door for me, bowing his head lower than he had for anyone else that evening. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, his voice low and thick with confusion. Do you require a car?" "Arthur," I said softly. "I have made my own arrangements. Thank you. Please take care." "Mum," he whispered. "Goodbye." "Mum," Vanessa's voice rang out from the landing, shrill and mocking. "Don't forget to write." "Or don't." The room erupted in laughter. It was a cruel, sharp sound that stripped away the last layer of maternal softness I had left in my heart. They were laughing at the bag lady. They were laughing at the trash taking itself out. I stepped over the threshold into the cool night air. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, cutting off the light and the noise. The silence of the driveway was immediate and absolute. I stood there for a moment, listening to the gravel crunch beneath my sensible shoes. Inside that house, I was a memory. Out here, in the dark, I was the architect. As I walked down the long driveway, the memories I had suppressed for years came flooding back. They thought I was a simple housewife who got lucky with a pension. They had no idea that 30 years ago, I was the co-founder of Holloway and Sterling, a private equity firm that reshaped the city's skyline. I had stepped into the shadows to give Vanessa the spotlight, to let her feel like the protagonist of her own life. It was a test, one she had failed spectacularly. The house she just kicked me out of was not hers. It belonged to a shell company I controlled. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed a single number. "Sterling," I said when the line clicked open. "Execute," I commanded. The response was immediate. "Already initiated. Margaret." The game had changed. I did not need to be inside the house to know exactly how the dominoes were falling. I sat in the back seat of a black sedan parked 2 blocks away, the heated leather seat providing the only warmth I had felt all evening. I had made the call, and now I watched the digital confirmation on my phone screen. The weapon I had launched was not a brick through a window or a public scream. It was a man named James Sterling. James had been my personal attorney for 25 years. He was a man who spoke softly and carried a briefcase capable of leveling empires. I imagined him walking up the driveway now. He would not be deterred by the valet or the security guard hired to keep out the riffraff. He walked with the authority of someone who knew who actually paid the insurance premiums on the property. Inside the house, the music would still be playing. Mark would be boasting about his new partnership, and Vanessa would be accepting compliments on a renovation she had paid for with money I had quietly funneled into her account. They believed they were the masters of their domain. They did not know that the house, the cars, and even the furniture were legally property of the Holloway Family Trust, an entity solely controlled by me. I looked at the time. It was 9 o'clock. James would be entering the foyer right now. I could picture the scene with crystal clarity. James would bypass the champagne tray. He would walk straight to the center of the room, looking like a grim reaper in a $3,000 suit. He would find Mark first. "Who the hell are you?" Mark would ask, likely slurring his words slightly from the scotch. James would not raise his voice. He never did. "My name is James Sterling. I am the legal representative for the primary trustee of this estate. I need everyone to stop the music." The silence that followed would be heavy. This was the moment the illusion cracked. I had instructed James to activate Clause 14 of the trust agreement. It was a failsafe I had written in decades ago, a clause I prayed I would never have to use. It stated that if the primary beneficiary, me, was ever forcibly removed from the premises or denied access to the residence, the tenancy at will, granted to any secondary occupants, was immediately revoked. Furthermore, because their personal accounts were linked to the family office for tax efficiency, a protective freeze was automatically triggered to prevent asset dissipation. Back in the car, my phone buzzed. It was a text from James Served. I closed my eyes and let out a long breath. The legal machinery was now grinding them down. Inside, the panic would be starting. Vanessa would be pulling out her phone, trying to transfer funds to pay the caterers who were suddenly looking nervous. She would open her banking app and see a zero balance, not because the money was gone, but because she no longer had the clearance to touch it. "What is going on?" Vanessa would scream, her facade of the perfect hostess crumbling. "Mark, do something. I can't access the joint account." Mark would stammer, staring at his phone in horror. "It says the account is locked by the administrator." "There is no mistake," James would tell them, his voice cutting through the rising murmur of the confused guests. "Mrs. Holloway has been removed from her residence. As a result, the permission for you to occupy this property has been rescinded. You are trespassing on private corporate property." The guests, the same people who had sneered at my cardigan and my worn-out shoes, would now be looking at my daughter with wide, fearful eyes. They were sharks. They could smell blood in the water. They realized instantly that the power had never been with the young, beautiful couple. It had been with the silent woman they had watched walk out the door. "This is insane," Vanessa would shout, her voice cracking. "This is my house. My mother is she's just a senile old woman. Your mother," James would correct her coldly, "is the chairman of the board. And you have exactly 1 hour to vacate the premises before I contact the sheriff to assist with an unlawful detainer." I stared out the window of the car. The lights of the house seemed to flicker. Or perhaps it was just a trick of the mist. I felt no joy, only a deep, resounding hollow in my chest. Justice was not sweet. It was cold, hard, and necessary. They had wanted to play the game of status and power. They had just found out they were playing against the person who owned the board. I watched the destruction of my daughter's social life through the high-definition security feed on my tablet, safe within the heated interior of the sedan. The delay was only a few seconds. Inside the house, the grand chandelier, which had cost $12,000 when I bought it 10 years ago, suddenly flickered and died. The smart home system, integrated into every wall and socket, obeyed my remote command instantly. The music cut out, plunging the room into a sudden, Jarring silence, followed immediately by the collective gasp of 300 guests. What is happening? Vanessa's voice was tinny through the device's audio, but her rising panic was unmistakable. Mark, fix the lights. It must be a breaker. I watched Mark fumble with his phone in the glow of the emergency exit signs I had insisted on installing for code compliance. He looked less like a rising corporate star and more like a trapped animal. It isn't the breaker. Van, Mark hissed, though in the silence of the room, his whisper carried to the nearby guests. The app says the master administrator has initiated a darker mode, a lockdown protocol. I can't override it. What do you mean you can't override it? Vanessa screamed, abandoning her poise entirely. We live here. At that moment, Arthur, the head caterer, stepped into the frame. He looked uncomfortable, but determined. He held a portable card reader in his hand. Mrs. Holloway. Mrs. Grant, Arthur said, his voice projecting clearly. We have a problem. The second installment for the catering services was scheduled to process at 10 o'clock. The transaction has been declined. I tried the backup card you gave me, and it was flagged as frozen. The guests near the front began to murmur. The whispers were no longer about my shabby clothes. They were sharp, fearful whispers about insolvency and fraud. Just run it again. Vanessa snapped, grabbing the reader from him. It's a glitch. My mother probably messed up the Wi-Fi when she left with her junk. It is not the Wi-Fi. Ma'am, Arthur said, taking the device back with a firm hand. The error code is specific. It says, asset freeze by legal owner. My staff is packing up. We cannot serve alcohol without a secured payment. It is a liability. The words legal owner hung in the air like smoke. Mark turned on Vanessa, his face twisting into a mask of ugly desperation. This was the man who had toasted to family unity an hour ago. Now, realizing the ship was sinking, he was scrambling for a lifeboat. You told me she signed the deed over, Mark said, his voice rising. You told me the trust was dissolved last year, Vanessa. My senior partners are here. Do you have any idea what this looks like? I thought she did. Vanessa stammered, backing away from him. She's just an old woman. Mark, she doesn't know how to work the smart system. She barely uses email. A woman in a glittering silver gown, one of Vanessa's so-called best friends, stepped forward. She held up her phone. Vanessa, the gate won't open. My driver says the security code is invalid. We are locked in. The panic was palpable now. The air conditioning had shut off, and the room was beginning to feel stifling. The guests were pulling out their phones, likely finding that the guest Wi-Fi had also been severed. Then, Arthur spoke again, delivering the final blow. He looked at the crowd, addressing them rather than my daughter. I worked for Margaret Holloway for 15 years at Holloway Capital, Arthur said, his voice steady. She built that firm from a 2-room office. If she has locked this house down, it is because she still holds the keys. She isn't the housekeeper. Folks, she is the bank. The silence that followed was absolute. I saw the realization wash over them. They had mocked the woman who held the mortgage. They had laughed at the hand that fed them. She did this, Vanessa whispered, her face pale in the emergency lighting. She is watching us. Mark grabbed her arm, roughly. You need to fix this. Call her. Beg her. I don't care what you do, but get the power back on before the firm thinks I am part of a bankruptcy fraud I can't. Vanessa cried, tears finally spilling over. She won't answer. I tapped the screen of my tablet. Ending the feed, I had seen enough. The house was dark, the champagne was warm, and the perfect family portrait had been slashed down the middle. They were beginning to understand that the useless old woman was the only thing standing between them and the abyss, and I had just stepped aside. The physical darkness of the house was nothing compared to the spotlight I was about to shine on their character. While Vanessa and Mark were busy screaming at the catering staff and trying to placate their bewildered guests in the dim emergency lighting, I sat calmly in the sedan and initiated the second phase of my plan. This was not about money anymore. It was about credibility. I opened the secure cloud drive on my tablet. For the past 3 years, ever since I first suspected that their love was conditional on my bank balance, I had been meticulous. I had saved voicemails, scanned discarded notes, and archived emails that they thought were deleted. I selected a folder labeled Due Diligence and hit send. The recipients included the entire board of directors at Mark's firm, the Neighborhood Homeowners Association mailing list, and the local society columnists who had been covering the party live. Inside the house, the reaction was delayed by about 2 minutes. Then, a collective chime rippled through the room as phones buzzed in unison. I watched on the security feed as Mark's senior partner, a stern man named Mr. Henderson, pulled his phone from his tuxedo pocket. He frowned, tapped the screen, and then his face went drains white. He looked up, his eyes locking onto Mark across the room. Mark, sweating and frantic, rushed over to him. "Mr. Henderson, I am so sorry about the power," Mark stammered, his hands shaking. "It's just a technical glitch. We will have it back on in a second." Mr. Henderson did not smile. He held up his phone, which was playing an audio attachment I had sent. The volume was high enough for the people nearby to hear. It was Mark's voice, recorded 6 months ago in his home office when he thought I was at the grocery store. "She is a senile old bat. Dave. We are just waiting for her to kick the bucket so we can liquidate the trust. I already promised the equity to cover the buy-in. Just stall the auditors for another month." The recording cut off. The silence in the room was heavier than the darkness. "Mark?" Mr. Henderson said, his voice low and dangerous. "Did you leverage a property you do not own to buy into this partnership? No. That's edited," Mark cried out, his voice cracking. "She's crazy. She tampered with it, but I wasn't done." At that exact moment, the phones of Vanessa's best friends lit up with a forwarded email chain. It was a conversation between Vanessa and a nursing home director, dated 3 weeks prior. One of the women, a blonde socialite named Chloe, who had rolled her eyes at me earlier, gasped. She looked at Vanessa with genuine horror. "Vanessa," Chloe said, her voice piercing the quiet room. "You were planning to have her declared incompetent. This email says you wanted the cheapest room available because she doesn't know the difference anyway." Vanessa froze. She looked around the room, seeing her carefully constructed reputation disintegrating in real time. The guests were backing away from her. They could forgive bankruptcy. They could not forgive the calculated abuse of a mother who had done nothing but support them. "I was trying to help her," Vanessa screamed, her composure shattering completely. "She's sick. She needs professional help. I was doing it for her own good. Stop lying." "Vanessa." A voice rang out from the back. It was Mrs. Higgins, the neighborhood gossip, holding her phone up like a lantern. "I just got the medical report Margaret attached. Her doctor declared her perfectly cognitive and physically fit 4 days ago. You lied to all of us. You told the committee she had dementia to explain why she wasn't at the charity gala. The murmurs turned into open hostility. The masks were off. My daughter and her husband stood in the center of their cold, dark kingdom, exposed as frauds. They had spent years painting me as a burden, a confused old woman who needed to be managed. In one click, I had revealed the truth. I was the victim of a predatory scheme, orchestrated by my own flesh and blood. I did not give interviews. I did not post a status update. My silence was my loudest weapon. By refusing to engage in a shouting match, I let the evidence speak for itself. The truth has a weight to it, a density that lies cannot mimic. "Get out," Mark roared at the guests, losing his mind. "Everyone get out of my house. It's not your house." "Mark." "Mr. Henderson said coldly, buttoning his jacket. "And as of this moment, you are suspended pending an ethics investigation. Do not come to the office tomorrow." I watched the guests stream out of the front door, stepping over the threshold where I had been exiled only an hour before. They were no longer laughing. They were scrambling to distance themselves from the stench of moral decay. I signaled my driver to start the engine. The investigation had begun, and the court of public opinion had already delivered its verdict. It took 3 days for the barrage of angry text messages to turn into begging. When Vanessa finally sent a message that simply asked, "Can we please talk?" I knew the initial shock had worn off, replaced by the crushing reality of her new situation. I agreed to meet her, but not at the house, and certainly not at the expensive bistro she used to drag me to so she could criticize my table manners. I chose a small, quiet coffee shop downtown, a place with hard wooden chairs and no tablecloths. It was a neutral ground, stripped of the pretense she relied on. I arrived 15 minutes early. I ordered a black coffee and sat by the window, watching the pedestrians. When Vanessa walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. The polished, glowing woman from the party was gone. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. Her face was devoid of makeup, and she wore a frantic, hunted expression. She looked like a child who had lost her mother in a supermarket, which, in a way, was exactly what she was. She sat down opposite me, not bothering to take off her coat. She looked at my coffee, then at my face, searching for the softness that had always been there. She did not find it. "Mom, how could you?" she whispered, her voice cracking instantly. "Mark lost his job. The bank is foreclosing on the car. You destroyed everything." I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. I did not feel guilty. I felt a strange, detached pity. I did not destroy anything. "Vanessa?" I said calmly. "I simply stopped propping up a stage set that you built on a swamp. You and Mark destroyed your own lives. I just turned on the lights." "We were just stressed," Vanessa argued, leaning forward, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "You know how much pressure Mark is under. We didn't mean those things. The eviction. It was just a bad night. We would never have actually let you sleep on the street." I looked her in the eye. "You packed my bags. Vanessa, you watched me walk out the door in the middle of the night. You didn't run after me. You didn't call me until your credit card stopped working." "I was scared," she cried, her voice rising slightly, drawing a few glances from nearby tables. I didn't know what to do." "Mark said we needed space." "Mark?" I said, cutting her off with a sharp tone. "Mark is a symptom. But you are the problem. You stood there and mocked me to your friends. You laughed when they called me a hoarder. You weren't scared. Vanessa, you were ashamed of me. She recoiled as if I had slapped her. Tears began to well up in her eyes. But I did not reach out to comfort her. That instinct had been cauterized the moment she closed the front door on me. I am your daughter. She sobbed, the tears finally spilling over. Doesn't that mean anything? You are supposed to forgive me. That is what mothers do. I am a mother, I replied, my voice steady and dry. But I am also a person. And you forgot that. You thought I was an appliance, something you could use until it broke, and then throw away. You gambled on my love being infinite and my self-respect being non-existent. You lost that bet. Vanessa wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked down at the table, her shoulders shaking. So what now? Are you going to leave us homeless? Is that your lesson? You are not homeless, I said. You have salaries. You have degrees. You have the ability to work, just as I did when I was your age. You just don't have my money anymore. You don't have my house. You are going to have to live the life you can actually afford. I can't, she whispered, shaking her head. I can't go back to renting. I can't face my friends. Then get new friends. I said simply. I placed a $10 bill on the table to cover my coffee. I stood up, smoothing down the front of my skirt. I looked at her one last time. I saw the fear in her eyes, not fear of poverty, but fear of irrelevance. She was terrified of becoming exactly what she thought I was, a nobody. Mom? Please, she begged, reaching out to grab my wrist. Her grip was weak, desperate. Don't leave me like this. I gently removed her hand from my arm. I am not leaving you. Vanessa, I am letting you go. There is a difference. You wanted independence from my burden. Now you have it. I walked out of the coffee shop without looking back. The bell above the door chimed, a cheerful sound that contrasted with the heavy silence I left behind at the table. I walked into the sunlight, feeling lighter than I had in 20 years. The cord was cut. She was on her own, and for the first time in a long time, so was I. The collapse of my daughter's marriage happened with the same speed and lack of grace as a cheap tent folding in a storm. I did not need to be a fly on the wall to witness it. The court filings were public record, and James Sterling, efficient as ever, placed the summary on my desk exactly 2 weeks after the party. He is filing for an annulment based on fraud, James said, his voice void of surprise. He claims he was misled regarding the financial standing of the marriage. He is also suing her for defamation regarding the recording you released. I looked at the paperwork. Mark had not just left. He had scrambled over Vanessa's back to get to the lifeboat. He is a survivor, I said, looking out the window of my new, modest, rented office. Rats usually are. Vanessa has been trying to reach out to her social circle for legal support. James continued, flipping a page. But it seems the phone lines are dead. The country club revoked their membership yesterday. Lack of payment, technically. But we both know they just don't want the scandal. I nodded. I had watched the social ecosystem of that town operate for 30 years. It was a machine fueled by envy and proximity to power. Vanessa and Mark were now radioactive. The same women who had sipped her champagne were now giving interviews to local blogs, claiming they had always suspected the couple was living beyond their means. Let them eat each other. I said, what about the assets? We have successfully liquidated the luxury vehicles and the vacation timeshare, James reported. The proceeds are sitting in the holding account. What are your instructions? I turned back to the desk. On it lay the blueprints for a project I had dreamed of for a decade, a dream I had shelved to pay for Vanessa's tuition, her wedding, and her endless renovations. Transfer the funds to the new non-profit entity, I said firmly, the Silver Horizon Initiative. I want to break ground on the community centre next month. It will be a place for seniors, a place where they can find legal aid, financial literacy courses, and social connection, a place where no one is treated like furniture. James smiled, a rare expression for him. It will be done. In the weeks that followed, the silence in my life was no longer empty. It was heavy with purpose. I was no longer the grandmother in the attic. I was the chairwoman in the boardroom. The contractors treated me with a deference that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with competence. When I pointed out a flaw in the structural integrity of the plans, they didn't roll their eyes. They took notes. The media, of course, caught wind of the story. A local investigative journalist had pieced together the timeline, the party, the blackout, the sudden transfer of wealth. They dubbed me the invisible woman who won. My phone rang incessantly with requests for interviews. Morning shows wanted me on their couches. Magazines wanted me on their covers. They wanted the drama. They wanted the angry mother. I refused them all. Mrs. Holloway. A producer pleaded with me over the phone one afternoon. This is a story of female empowerment. The world needs to hear your voice. My voice is in my work. I replied, I have no interest in being your entertainment. If you want to cover something, cover the opening of the centre. Otherwise, please lose this number. I hung up. I did not need their validation. I had spent a lifetime seeking validation from my family, and it had nearly bankrupted me. I was done performing. One evening, I drove past the old house. It was dark. The for sale sign planted firmly in the manicured lawn. The bank had taken possession after I evicted the tenants. It looked smaller than I remembered. It was just a pile of bricks and stucco. It held no power over me anymore. I drove to my new apartment, a quiet, two-bedroom place in a sensible neighbourhood. It was not grand. It did not have marble floors or crystal chandeliers. But when I put my key in the lock, it turned smoothly. When I walked inside, the air smelled of lemon and peace. I sat down in my armchair, the one Mark had wanted to throw away because it was tacky, and opened a book. The phone didn't ring. No one was asking for money. No one was insulting my clothes. I was alone. But for the first time in 20 years, I was not lonely. I was free. The ink on the final signature page was still wet when I set the pen down. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the sunlight streaming into the conference room felt different than it had in the morning. It was no longer the harsh glare of exposure, but the steady, warm light of resolution. I looked at the document in front of me. It was the deed of transfer, moving the entirety of my liquid assets and the property portfolio valued at roughly $25 million into the irrevocable trust for the Silver Horizon Initiative. James Sterling sat across from me, his hands folded on the polished mahogany table. He did not smile, but his eyes held a glimmer of profound satisfaction. He picked up the document, checked the signature, and placed it into his leather briefcase. The click of the latches sounded like a cell door locking, but in this case, it was locking the demons out, not in. That is it then. James said softly. The transfer is immediate. As of this moment, the family trust is dissolved. There's nothing left for any future heir to claim, contest, or borrow against. And Vanessa? I asked, my voice steady. Her attorney received the digital notice 3 minutes ago, James replied. She now knows that the safety net is gone, not just for today, but forever. I turned my chair to look out the window at the city skyline. I waited for the guilt to hit me, the maternal instinct that had ruled my life for 3 decades. I waited for the urge to call her, to write a check, to fix the mess she had made. But the feeling never came. Instead, I felt a deep, quiet, solitary peace. I realized then that I was alone in this room, and I would be alone in my apartment tonight. There would be no family dinners, no grandchildren running through the halls, no false laughter. It was a terrifying prospect for most people, but I looked at it and saw the truth. I had been alone in that crowded house for years. At least this loneliness was honest. I stood up and walked out of the conference room. In the lobby, I ran into Mr. Henderson, Mark's former senior partner, a month ago, at that disastrous party. He had looked through me as if I were a piece of misplaced furniture. Now, seeing me exit the office of the city's top estate attorney, he stopped in his tracks. He looked at my simple suit, which was high quality but understated, and then at my face. He did not see a victim anymore. He saw a peer, Mrs. Holloway, he said, stepping forward and extending his hand with a sudden, awkward eagerness. I heard about the new foundation. It is a remarkable thing you are doing for the community. Truly remarkable. I looked at his hand but did not take it. I let the silence stretch for 5 seconds, long enough for him to feel the weight of his past dismissal. Thank you, Mr. Henderson, I said coolly. It is amazing what one can accomplish when one stops being a doormat. He pulled his hand back, flushing slightly. Yes. Well, if you ever need financial consultation for the endowment, my firm would be honored. I have my own people, I replied, walking past him toward the elevator. As the elevator doors closed, shutting out his surprised expression, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The tension that had been a tight wire in my chest for weeks finally snapped, leaving behind a calm slackness. I had not raised a hand against my daughter. I had not hired thugs or planted evidence. I had simply removed the lie she was living on. I had let gravity take its course. They had defined power as the ability to spend money you did not earn and command people you did not respect. I had redefined it. Power was the ability to walk away. Power was the ability to say no and mean it. My phone buzzed in my purse. I knew it was Vanessa. I knew she had read the notice. She was likely realizing that the temporary setback was now a permanent reality. There would be no inheritance to wait for. There would be no bailouts. She was free to build her own life, just as she had always claimed she wanted. I did not check the phone. I stepped out into the busy street, blending into the crowd. I was an old woman in a grey coat, invisible to the passers-by. But I walked with the stride of a giant. The war was over. The truth had won. And for the first time in my life, I belonged entirely to myself. It has been 6 months since I walked out of that conference room, and in that time, the world has continued to turn, indifferent to the dramas of small families. I stood in the center of the atrium of the newly completed Silver Horizon Center. The space smelled of fresh paint, sawdust, and the sharp, clean scent of new beginnings. Sunlight poured in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the polished concrete floors. This was not a home for a family that would betray me. It was a sanctuary for hundreds of seniors who had been cast aside by a society that worshipped youth. James Sterling walked up beside me, his footsteps echoing in the vast, empty hall. He held a tablet in his hand, checking the final guest list for the opening ceremony scheduled for the following evening. "The mayor confirmed his attendance," James said, looking up at me. "And the press pass requests are overflowing. They are still calling you the architect of justice. Let them call me whatever they want," I replied, running my hand along the smooth railing of the reception desk. "As long as they spell the name of the foundation correctly on the check." James hesitated for a moment. I knew that look. It was the look he gave when he had information that was personal, not legal. "I received an update on the eviction proceedings for the remaining assets," he said quietly. "And I checked on Vanessa, as you asked." I did not turn to face him. I looked out the window at the busy street, watching the cars rush by. "And she is living in a 2-bedroom apartment on the south side of the city," James reported. "She is working 40 hours a week as an assistant manager at a clothing boutique. It is entry-level. She takes the bus to work." I felt a small, sharp pang in my chest, the ghost of the mother I used to be. But I did not let it surface. I remembered the cold night air when she locked me out. I remembered the laughter. "Is she healthy?" I asked. "She looks tired," James admitted. "But yes, she is healthy. She asked my paralegal if there was any chance you would read a letter if she sent one." I closed my eyes for a second. A letter. Words on a page. Once. I would have given anything for a kind word from her. Now. I knew the cost of those words. Reconciliation would be easy. It would be comfortable. But it would be a lie. If I saved her now, she would never learn that actions have consequences that cannot be undone by a tearful apology. She needed to survive on her own to become a person worth knowing. "Tell her no," I said, my voice firm. "Not yet. Maybe in a year. Maybe in 5. But not today." "Understood," James said. He did not judge. He simply tapped the screen of his tablet. "And the house. The new owners close on the property tomorrow." "Good," I said. "It is just a building. James, wood and stone? Let someone else fill it with their memories. Mine are packed away." I checked my watch. I had a meeting with the board of directors for the city hospital in 30 minutes regarding a partnership. My schedule was full. My mind was sharp. I was 56 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was not defined by who I was married to or who I had given birth to. I was defined by what I built. "Are you ready to face the cameras?" "Mrs." Holloway James asked, gesturing toward the main doors where a small group of photographers had already gathered on the sidewalk. I straightened my jacket. I thought about the woman who had stood in the corner of a party, wearing a fraying cardigan, afraid to speak. That woman was dead. She had died the night the lights went out. "I am ready," I said. I walked toward the glass doors. I did not look back at the shadows of the atrium. I did not wonder what Vanessa was doing at that exact moment. I simply focused on the warmth radiating from the glass. I pushed the doors open and stepped out onto the pavement. The flashbulbs popped, blinding and bright, but I did not blink. I walked straight into the light, alone, unburdened, and finally, completely free. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I really want to know where you guys are tuning in from. So drop your city or country in the comments below and let me know what you would have done in Margaret's shoes. If you enjoyed the drama, make sure to smash that subscribe button for Nora revenge stories, hit the like, and give us a hype to help this story reach even more people. Catch you in the next one.